Love, the grand illusion, the beautiful trap, the cosmic game. We chase it, we rive it, we write songs and poetry in its name. And yet there are those who, when they find love in its purest, most profound form, turn their backs and walk away. Not out of hatred, not out of boredom, but out of something much more subtle, much more elusive. You see, to truly love is to dissolve. It is to step beyond the little fortress of the self, beyond the carefully constructed identity that says, I am this, I am that. Love is not merely an experience, it is a dissolution, a surrender to something far greater than the individual. And that, my friends, is terrifying. A man who walks away from deep love is not rejecting the other person. No, he is resisting his own transformation. Because to love deeply is to risk everything. It is to let go of control, to surrender to the vast, unpredictable current of existence itself. And this is where fear creeps in. We have been trained, conditioned, from the very beginning to be someone, to hold on to ourselves, to define ourselves by what we do, what we achieve, what we possess. Love, in its deepest form, laughs at all of that. It strips away the illusions. It says, you are not who you think you are something much wilder, much freer. And some men, when faced with this truth, retreat, not because they do not want love, but because they are not yet ready to die to themselves. But here is the paradox. The more you resist love, the more you suffer. For love is not something you own, it is something you become. And when you walk away from it, you do not escape it. You only delay the inevitable. So, to those who fear love's depth, who turn away when the current pulls too strongly, know this. You are not running from love. You are running from yourself. And no matter how far you go, no matter how many distractions you create, life will always bring you back to this moment, to this lesson, until you are ready to surrender. Because love is not a destination. It is the ocean itself. And you were never meant to stay on the shore. Love, in its truest form, is not something one can hold on to, not something that can be placed in a box, labeled and stored away like a prized possession. It is not a transaction, not an exchange where one measures how much is given and how much is received in return. Love, in its deepest essence, is the dissolution of boundaries, the melting away of the rigid self into something far greater, far more fluid than the mind can comprehend. But the mind is not like this. The mind wants structure, wants certainty, wants to categorize love into roles and responsibilities, into conditions and expectations. It wants to hold love in its hands, to claim ownership over it, to ensure that it stays within the lines drawn carefully by tradition, culture, and personal experience. And yet, love is not a thing to be owned. It is not something one can possess or control, for the moment one tries to contain it, it ceases to be love and becomes something else entirely, a form of attachment, a mere reflection of one's own desires rather than an experience of something beyond the self. This is where fear arises. Love, true love, is a force of destruction just as much as it is a force of creation. It breaks down walls, dissolves identities, strips away the illusions that one has so carefully built over time. To love is to step outside the fortress of selfhood, to let go of the need to define, to be defined. And for many this is terrifying. They have spent their entire lives crafting an identity, a sense of self that is familiar and secure. They know who they are in relation to the world around them. They are this, they are that. They have built themselves from experiences, from beliefs, from a sense of control over their own existence. But love comes along like the ocean tide, relentless, unyielding, pulling at the edges of this selfhood, whispering that perhaps none of it is real, that perhaps at the deepest level there is no separate self at all, only a vast, interconnected existence where the idea of me and you begins to blur. And so when faced with this truth, some turn away, not because they do not want love, but because they do not yet know how to lose themselves in it. The illusion of possession is comforting. It gives the appearance of security, the feeling that if one can just hold on tightly enough, love will remain fixed and unwavering. But love does not work this way. Love is not static. It is movement, it is flow, it is the current of life itself. and yet many attempt to grasp it as if it were a solid object, as if it could be kept in place by sheer will. They seek to own love in the way they own possessions, to make it a part of their identity, an extension of their ego. But love is not something that can be possessed any more than the wind can be caught in one's hands. This is why deep love is so often met with resistance. The deeper one loves, the more one must surrender. And surrender is not something the ego welcomes. The ego wants to remain intact, to stay in control, to dictate the terms of love, rather than allow love to dictate the terms of existence. But love does not negotiate. It asks for everything. It does not say, give me a piece of yourself, and you may keep the rest. It says, let go, fall, dissolve. And that is where the choice arises to embrace this dissolution, or to resist it, to step into the unknown, or to retreat into the familiar. Many choose the latter. They walk away not because they do not feel the love, not because they do not recognize its depth, but because they are not yet ready to disappear into it. They fear what they will become without the rigid sense of self they have always known. They fear the loss of control, the unpredictability of surrender. And so they convince themselves that they are better off without it, that love is too much, too overwhelming, too consuming. But in truth, they are not walking away from love. They are walking away from themselves. They are walking away from the dissolution that love demands, from the loss of self that is required to experience something greater than the individual mind can comprehend. They are choosing safety over surrender, identity over infinity, the known over the unknowable. And yet, love does not leave them. For love is not something outside of oneself, not something that can be escaped or rejected. It is the fabric of existence itself, the essence of what one already is beneath the layers of ego and identity. One can turn away from it for a time, can resist its pull, can build walls to keep it at bay. But love is patient. It waits. It does not disappear, for it was never separate to begin with. It is always there, beneath the noise of thought, beneath the fear of dissolution, beneath the illusion of control. Eventually, the moment comes when one can no longer resist. When the walls crumble, when the fear gives way to a deeper knowing, when the self finally understands that it was never meant to remain isolated, never meant to cling so tightly to the illusion of separateness. And in that moment, love is no longer something to possess, no longer something to fear. It simply is. It is not yours or mine, not something that can be held or contained, but something that flows through all things, something that is, and always has been, the very essence of life itself. Change is an unsettling force. It creeps in quietly, dismantling the structures one has carefully built over time, forcing a confrontation with the unknown. People speak of transformation as if it is a grand, triumphant event, but in truth, transformation is rarely comfortable. It is raw, disorienting, and often painful. This is why so many resist it, and nowhere is this resistance stronger than when it comes to love. Real, profound, soul-shifting love. Love in its deepest form does not allow a person to remain the same. It does not gently weave itself into the life one has already constructed, allowing all things to continue as they were. No, love comes as a wildfire, burning away the familiar, demanding surrender, and leaving in its wake something unrecognizable, yet undeniably real. It tears apart old identities, shatters long-held beliefs, and forces one to confront the vastness of what it truly means to be alive. And this precisely is what makes it so terrifying. The mind craves stability. It wants things to make sense, to fit neatly within the framework of what is already known. It spends years crafting a self, carefully defining what is acceptable, what is possible, what is safe. It clings to labels, to memories, to patterns, because these things give it the illusion of control. Even suffering, when familiar, feels safer than the unknown. And then love appears, not the shallow kind that asks for nothing, but the deep, consuming kind that demands everything. It does not allow for half measures. It does not say, come as you are and remain unchanged. It says, come and let everything you think you are dissolve. For some, this is a calling that cannot be ignored, a pull so strong that the fear of change is overpowered by the desire to merge into something greater. But for others, the fear wins. They turn away, not because they do not feel the love, but because they feel it too much. They sense what it is asking of them, and they are not yet ready to lose themselves in it. They are not yet ready to let go of the structure they have built, the identity they have crafted so carefully over time. And so they run not from love itself, but from the transformation it demands. There is a paradox at the heart of this resistance. The very thing that is feared, change, dissolution, the loss of self, is the key to the deepest fulfillment. But the mind, conditioned to grasp onto what is known, cannot easily accept this. It whispers, what if you lose yourself and there is nothing left? What if you surrender and become something unrecognizable? The fear is not of love itself, but of what love will strip away. It is the fear of no longer being able to return to the comfortable, the familiar, the safe. And yet, safety is an illusion. The self that one clings to so desperately is already changing, moment by moment, whether one resists it or not. The things once believed with certainty shift over time. The identity once held as absolute begins to blur at the edges. Love only accelerates this process, forces it into consciousness, makes it undeniable. To accept love fully is to accept that nothing can remain fixed, that all things flow, that the only real truth is change itself. This is why so many retreat. They convince themselves that love is too much, too overwhelming, too consuming. They rationalize their departure, saying it is not the right time, that they are not ready, that they need to find themselves before they can give themselves to another. But what they do not realize is that the self they seek to hold on to so tightly is the very thing preventing them from experiencing love in its fullest form. They are not protecting themselves from love, they are protecting themselves from transformation. But what is this self they are so afraid to lose? Is it real, or is it simply a collection of habits, fears, and conditioned responses? Is it truly something solid, or is it a fleeting mirage, an illusion that only feels real because it has been reinforced over time? If one looks deeply enough, one sees that there is nothing to hold on to, nothing to protect. The self is not a fixed entity. It is a river, constantly flowing, constantly changing, whether one resists it or not. So the question is not whether one will change, but whether one will resist the change or surrender to it. Love, real love, asks for surrender. It asks one to step into the unknown, to let go of the need to define and control, to dissolve into something beyond the individual mind. It does not allow for hesitation. It does not allow for halfway measures. It asks for everything. And for those who are not ready, this is simply too much. But resistance does not stop the process. One can walk away from love, but one cannot walk away from transformation. It will come in different forms, through different experiences, through different lessons, but it will come. Because transformation is not something love imposes. It is something life itself demands. And the more one resists, the more painful the process becomes. Eventually there comes a moment when resistance is no longer possible, when the illusion of control shatters, when the walls built around the heart crumble, when the self finally understands that it was never meant to remain stagnant. And in that moment, the fear that once seemed so powerful fades into nothingness, replaced by something infinitely greater. But until that moment arrives, some will continue to walk away, not because they do not want love, but because they are not yet ready for the transformation that love brings. They will tell themselves stories, create reasons, find excuses. But deep down, beneath all the justifications, the truth remains the same. They are not walking away from love. They are walking away from the fear of becoming something new. There is a strange illusion embedded deep within the human mind, the belief that one can walk away from love without consequence, that turning away from another is the end of the story. But what few realize is that to escape love is not to escape the other person, nor is it to escape the experience itself. It is to escape something much closer, something far more intimate. It is to run from the very fabric of one's own being. Love, in its deepest form, acts like a mirror. It reflects back everything one is, not just the polished image presented to the world, but the hidden layers buried beneath years of conditioning. It reveals the beauty, yes, but also the wounds, the insecurities, the fears, the unresolved shadows that linger quietly in the depths of the self. To love is to be seen fully and without disguise. And to be seen in this way is one of the most unsettling experiences a person can endure. There is a vulnerability in love that no amount of preparation can guard against. It leaves no corner of the self untouched. The mind may wish to present only the most admirable qualities, to curate an image of strength, confidence, and control. But love is not interested in images. It cuts through masks with a precision that cannot be avoided, exposing both the light and the dark in equal measure. And for many, this exposure is unbearable. It is easier to walk away than to face what love reveals, easier to convince oneself that the relationship was too intense, too complicated, too consuming. The mind will weave intricate stories to justify the retreat stories about timing, about incompatibility, about needing space to find oneself. But beneath all the reasons, there is often a much quieter truth, the fear of facing what love has uncovered. What makes this fear so potent is the understanding, often unspoken, that love is not merely an external experience. It is an invitation to meet oneself at the deepest level. The presence of another becomes a catalyst, awakening dormant parts of the self that would otherwise remain hidden. Desires long suppressed, wounds long ignored, and questions long unanswered begin to surface. And with them comes the uncomfortable realization that who one thought they were is only a fragment of the whole. To stay in love, then, is not simply to remain with another person. It is to remain in relationship with one's own unfolding. It is to allow the dismantling to continue, to let the layers peel back one by one, exposing the raw, unguarded truth beneath. This is why love feels so dangerous. It threatens to unmake the self as it is known, to dismantle the carefully crafted identity that has provided a sense of security for so long. Walking away offers the promise of safety. It allows one to retreat into familiar patterns, to reassemble the self in a way that feels more manageable, more predictable. But the safety is an illusion. For what was seen in love cannot be unseen. The mirror remains, even when the other person is gone. The wounds exposed do not simply disappear. They wait patiently, lingering beneath the surface, calling to be healed. And this is the great trick of the mind, the belief that by walking away one can leave the process unfinished. But the work of love does not belong to the relationship alone. It is the work of the self, the work of becoming whole. To walk away from love is to delay this work, not to escape it. The lessons will return, disguised in different forms, through different people, in different moments. Life is relentless in this way. It will always bring one back to the mirror until what needs to be faced is finally embraced. There is a quiet suffering that follows those who walk away from deep love. It is not always obvious at first, often masked by distraction or the comfort of solitude. But beneath the surface there is an ache, a sense of something unfinished, something left behind. The mind may convince itself that the decision was necessary, that life is easier without the weight of such intensity. But the heart knows otherwise. The heart knows that what was truly walked away from was not the other person, but the opportunity to meet oneself fully. There is no running from the self. Wherever one goes, there it is waiting in the stillness, whispering in the quiet moments when the distractions fall away. The questions that arose in love remain unanswered. The wounds that were revealed remain unhealed. The fear that drove the retreat remains unresolved. And so the journey becomes circular. The same patterns repeat, the same lessons appear, each time offering another chance to face what was once avoided. Life does not punish or condemn. There is no judgment in this unfolding. There is only the gentle, persistent invitation to return to the work, to stop running, to turn toward the mirror, no matter how painful the reflection may be. The great irony is that what is feared most, the loss of self, is the very thing that makes love so necessary. For what is being lost is not the true self, but the false layers built up over time. The ego resists because it cannot imagine what lies on the other side of this dissolution. But the heart knows. The heart knows that beneath the fear, beneath the crumbling structures, there is a deeper self waiting to be discovered, a self that is not bound by fear, not fragmented by wounds, but whole, vast, and infinite. It is this self that love seeks to awaken. And whether one stays or walks away, the invitation remains. Love is not bound to a single person, a single experience. It is woven into the fabric of existence itself. It will continue calling again and again until the fear of transformation is finally overcome. One can walk away 1,000 times, but the journey always leads back to the same place, the quiet. Undeniable truth that what was being sought in another was never outside it at all. It was always within, waiting patiently to be found. Love is like the ocean, vast, boundless, and indifferent to the desires of those who stand at its edge. It calls with a quiet, eternal rhythm, drawing souls toward its depths without ever needing to persuade. There is something magnetic about it, something both alluring and terrifying. The mind longs to touch it, to taste its beauty, but always with the secret hope that it can remain dry, that it can feel the ocean without surrendering to its currents. Yet love, like the ocean, cannot be experienced from the shore. It demands immersion. It asks not for cautious observation, but for the courage to step in, to let the tides take hold, to be carried where they will. There is a paradox hidden in this pool. The very same force that draws one toward love is the force that awakens fear. The surface of the ocean glimmers, inviting the heart to enter, but beneath the surface lies a mystery too deep for the mind to grasp. No one who enters the ocean remains unchanged. The self that walks into the water is never the same self that emerges. The mind senses this truth even before the body moves. Somewhere in the depths, there is a promise of transformation, and it is this promise that so many resist. To love is to step into something greater than oneself. It is to surrender the illusion of separateness, to allow the self to dissolve into something vaster and more fluid. But the mind clings to the shore, to the solid ground of its own identity. It wants to control the experience, to measure how far it will wade, how much it will feel, how deeply it will surrender. But the ocean does not work this way. There is no halfway with the ocean. One is either in or not at all. This is why love feels so dangerous, because it does not allow for partial surrender. It is not content to simply touch the surface. It pulls, it beckons, always asking for more. It asks not just for affection, not just for comfort, but for the dissolution of the self. And the deeper one goes, the more the familiar sense of control begins to fade. The currents grow stronger, the ground beneath the feet disappears, and the mind begins to panic. It clutches at anything solid, anything that will allow it to stay afloat without losing itself entirely. But the more one clings, the more the ocean resists. Love does not offer safety. It does not provide the comforting illusion of certainty. It is vast, unpredictable, and endlessly shifting. One moment it is gentle, carrying the self with tender care. The next it is wild and tumultuous, tearing away everything that is not essential. This is the rhythm of love, the constant ebb and flow, the dance between holding and letting go. And those who cannot surrender to this rhythm will always find themselves returning to the shore, believing they have escaped the ocean's pull, when in truth they have only delayed their own transformation. There is a quiet wisdom in the ocean, a knowledge that what the mind fears most is the very thing the heart longs for. The mind clings to the edges of the self, building walls to preserve what is known. But the heart understands something deeper, that the self is not meant to remain fixed. It is meant to dissolve, to flow, to become part of something greater. Love is the current that carries the self back into this truth, but no current can carry one who refuses to let go. Many turn away from love not because they do not feel it, but because they feel it too much. They sense the current beneath the surface, the pull toward something infinite, and they fear what they will lose if they allow themselves to be taken. They believe they are protecting themselves, preserving their sense of who they are. But what they do not realize is that the self they cling to is already drifting. The shoreline they hold on to is not solid ground, but a fleeting illusion, always shifting, always eroding beneath the surface. To resist love is to resist the nature of life itself. The entire universe moves in cycles: creation, dissolution, transformation. The ocean does not fight the tide. The moon does not resist the pull of gravity. Everything flows, everything merges, everything surrenders. Only the human mind insists on standing apart, on maintaining the illusion of separateness. But this resistance is the root of suffering. The tighter one holds onto the self, the more painful the journey becomes. What the mind fears most, the loss of self, is in truth the greatest gift that love offers. For what is lost in love is not the true self, but the false shell built up over years of conditioning. The waves strip away the masks, the defenses, the stories one tells oneself about who they are, and beneath it all, something far more real begins to emerge. Not a separate, isolated self, but a being inseparable from the whole, flowing with the same infinite rhythm as the ocean itself. But this can only be known through surrender. No amount of standing at the edge, no amount of intellectual understanding can replace the experience of immersion. One must step into the water. One must allow the current to take hold, to lose sight of the shore, to let the self dissolve into the vastness. And in this dissolution, something extraordinary happens. The fear that once seemed so overwhelming begins to dissolve as well. The need to define, to control, to hold on falls away. What remains is not emptiness, but freedom, an endless, boundless presence that was always there beneath the surface. Those who walk away from love believe they are preserving themselves. They tell themselves they are protecting their own identity, their own independence. But they are not escaping the ocean. They are only delaying the inevitable. For the ocean is not outside of them, it is within. The current does not flow toward something separate. It flows toward the self that has been waiting to be discovered all along. And whether one surrenders now or years from now, the invitation remains the same. The ocean will always call, always pull, always wait with infinite patience. To love is to step into this infinite current, to surrender the illusion of separateness, to allow the self to be carried beyond what the mind can comprehend. It is not a loss, but a return, not a destruction, but a merging. And in the depths of this surrender, one discovers what was always hidden beneath the fear, the truth that there was never anything to lose, only everything to become. So when a man walks away from deep love, he is not walking away from another, he is walking away from the ocean within himself. He is choosing the shore, the illusion of safety, the fragile walls of a self that was never meant to remain fixed. For the current will call again, in this life or another, because love is not something one can avoid. It is not an experience bound to a single person or a fleeting moment. It is the eternal force woven into the fabric of existence itself. And no matter how far one runs, there will always come a time when the walls crumble, when the tide rises once more, and the soul remembers what it was always destined to become. Something infinite, something boundless, something that was never separate from the ocean at all.